Thank you for that spirited speech, Brownie. Now I'd like to bring up the third speaker for the opposition, Mr. Peter Morrissey.
Mr. Speaker, members of the panel, both teams, the audience who's almost certainly completely unbiased Sciences Po students. I appreciate that. Good evening. Now, color me confused is an idiom that probably doesn't make sense in this room. Color me confused because I am neither French nor am I English. So I am deeply confused by this room full of partisans debating between them which country is worse.
Here, here.
Let's take a moment to internalize that absurdity before considering a few more. But I want to note a couple of things that have struck me as strange. First, I would note this, to add to the issue of which country is worse. I traveled across the Atlantic to England like some deeply confused pilgrim, and I can attest to you this. It is no promised land. It is no promised land by any reasonable definition, and I'm wondering how effective your gendarmerie are going to be when I overstay the 4 days I'm allowed to be in this country. And it is because it is no promised land. I would second note this. Joey spent a lot of time talking about the interests of French millionaires, but I don't really care about the interests of French millionaires. I am not French, I am not a millionaire, and as I mentioned, I don't fully understand what's happening in this round. So what I want to do for a minute is talk about the hyperboles we've heard, and then I want to talk about the moral responsibilities that French millionaires have. They've presented themselves in a very positive light, so I am sure underneath there somewhere, underneath the pearls and the jewels and the jokes, is morality. And to that I appeal, for indeed, what have we if not morality, he said ironically. We've been told some hyperboles. First, that France is teetering on the edge of a violent and angry uprising. And yet, in the middle of one of those speeches, we had a nice allusion to the fact that France was too lazy to get out of bed, I believe the expression was, to go fight in a war. The country that could not haul itself out of bed is likely to simultaneously take the heads off of its wealthy. I would not question the changes in work ethic in the intervening 224 years since heads were last taken off, but I would only submit to you that perhaps the world today is different than the world was 224 years ago, for reasons I shouldn't need to explain to this august crowd, and am not going to. So I would note this first. I would note that you have a moral obligation to stay in this country as French millionaires, and that is no small thing. We would note that you have profited immensely from the public services that all French have paid for, the investments they made in education and health and public infrastructure. It is those things that made most French millionaires, not ancestral wealth, and not by being Marie Antoinette's great-great-great-great-grandniece. Most of those affected by this tax, those at the upper echelons of corporate life, profited immensely from the contributions that all French made to an economy that was, until rather recently, the envy of much of the world. And it can be, again, we would recognize, if they are willing to pay back that contribution they made. We recognize that redistribution is sometimes necessary, and the degree to which it is necessary varies with the vicissitudes of the situation. And this is one that demands somewhat more. This is especially for the case, for example, for those corporate heads who employ many in this country, whose obligation to their workers should and must go beyond the end of the day. Those are things that are important. Those are things that have been ignored. And those are things that should be a crucial part of this round as we consider whether or not it is acceptable to leave. Mere consideration of losing one's head in a country they have already admitted is too busy drinking champagne to get up and take some heads off should not be that on which you evaluate this round. I will take you in just one moment. It should be something else. Go ahead.
If we leave, we're obviously not taking our factories and our luggage. Our businesses will remain. Would you agree that there will only be a minor impact and perhaps a positive impact on the French industry?
I would note this. The Normans who crossed the Channel in 1066 may have maintained some attachment to French for a little while, but we think once we're exposed to the incredibly awesome England this side has described to you, their interest is probably going to divest. I would note this. They live in a world in which England is the best place imaginable. I don't buy it, you don't buy it, but they seem to. So by their very own standard, they are unlikely to maintain some glorious attraction to a country they have described as unbelievably terrible. By their own standard, they're in deep trouble on that one. And this silence of French people suggests to me that you know I have a point. So finally, I would note this. Why is this relevant to this situation? Because during the current economic malaise, we recognize that everyone needs to make sacrifices. And to fill that $37 billion euro budget hole, the poor and the middle class are going to be making some pretty serious sacrifices in cuts. The wealthy don't use the same services the poor do, for instance, like education and health and food assistance. They don't use those same things. So the sacrifices that need to be made by then to keep La Repubblica functioning are different. It comes in the form of increased taxes. It does not come in the form of taking one's head off, because that is an hyperbole I think we can probably drop at this point. If the country could not get out of bed, it was certainly not one that is going to take its millionaires' heads off. If England is so perfect, its millionaires are absolutely not going to maintain this glorious attraction to France, that they will continue employing these people. I implore you, if not to use our standard, for we are Brits and apparently the greatest country in the world, use their own to evaluate them. We're deeply proud to oppose.